Good morning. Today we look at Mark chapter 8, verses 22 through 38. And Jesus has been talking with his disciples and he had fed everybody twice. And the disciples, we ended yesterday with Jesus asking them, do you still not understand? And I think that's a pertinent question right here when Jesus asks that. Because as we look at these next few verses, in verse 22, they come to Bethsaida. And some people bring a blind man to Jesus and beg Jesus, it says, to touch him. And Jesus took this man by the hand and he led him away from the village, out into the countryside. So they were alone, evidently. There weren't all these people around. And Jesus puts saliva on his eyes and lays his hands on him and asks, can you see anything? And the man says, well, I can see people walking, but they kind of look like trees. His vision wasn't completely restored. And I think this is a strange incident here, a strange telling, because normally when Jesus heals someone, it's instantaneous and complete. But this man, his vision wasn't quite complete yet. So Jesus laid his hands upon his eyes again. He says he looked intently and his sight was restored and he saw clearly. And so this man, friends had brought him to Jesus and Jesus gave him his sight back. A wonderful miracle. I remember as a kid sometimes, closing my eyes and walking around in the house and, you're pretending you're blind. But you kind of know where things are and, yeah, you might run into something. But, to think about living your life that way, yeah, it's just, and I know I've known people that have been able to see, and then as they get older, they completely lose their vision. And others that, we all know people that their eyesight begins to fail, that with macular degeneration or tunnel vision, or they can't see as well. But this man, having not been able to see at all, could now see and could see clearly and plainly. And what does Jesus say to him? He says, he sent him away to his home and said, do not even go into the village. Don't go back into town and tell these people that you can see now. Go home. Where was home? Who knows where home was? If it was, in another city. He'd come to Bethsaida. So whether this man lived in a different city, but in a different place. But Jesus, again, it was, don't go, don't tell. Just, kind of keep this under your hat stuff. And just after that, then Jesus went on with his disciples. They were, he was an itinerant preacher. He was traveling about from place to place, even though his home was in Capernaum after he had moved. But, he continued to go around teaching and healing. And as they were traveling, in Mark's gospel, as they were traveling, Jesus asks the question, who do people say that I am? And I have that word people circled in my surrounded with ink. But who do people say that I am? And the answer is, well, they're really not sure. Some say John the Baptist or Elijah or a prophet, but, nobody really knows for sure. And nobody was really going to go out on the limb and say, you are the Messiah, you are the Savior. But then Jesus asks the question, who do you say? And I have that, but who do you, and I have that word you circled, say that I am. And Peter answered, you are the Messiah. And every time I read this, I hear words from a cantata we did 40 years ago probably, and with the male lead who is playing Peter singing, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And it's just such a powerful statement. Such a powerful statement. You are the Christ. You are my Lord. And then Jesus, just like he had told that blind man not to go say anything, tells us, sternly orders them to tell no one. And And so just remember what I pointed out as we started. Yesterday's lesson ended with, do you not yet understand? And here just these few verses later, from verse 21 to verse 30, Peter says, you are the Christ. They know, they understand, they get it. And that's, I mean, when I read that question and I see that circled word you, but who do you say that I am? It's a reminder to me that each and every one of us needs to claim Jesus as our personal Lord and Savior. You know, it's not just decision theology, and we hear a lot of that in today's world, that you have to decide as an adult, you have to profess your faith as an adult. You know, there's nothing wrong with having believed in Jesus, you know, from all of your life. I mean, I don't remember a time ever that I didn't believe in Jesus as my Lord. I remember on my confirmation day that I professed that belief publicly to the congregation. I affirmed the words of my baptism, but I didn't need to go through the baptism itself again. I didn't need to have all of that again because I've known and believed all of my life. And I didn't need a reawakening. Well, sometimes we need to be reminded, and I think that's why we go to church. That's why we go to worship. That's why we read our Bible, as that reinforcement, as that just continuing building up of our trust. And the more times I read the Bible, and the more times I think about these things, you know, I truly believe that my faith gets stronger. So Jesus has asked, who do you say that I am? And Peter responds, you are the Christ. You are the Messiah. You are the promised one of God. I mean, these disciples, we haven't had the transfiguration yet in Mark. That's the next chapter, I think. But they had heard, some of them were there when Jesus was baptized and heard those words, this is my son in whom I am well pleased, you know, and they got it. They knew who Jesus was. And then Jesus throws a wrench into things. It says he begins to teach them what it means for him to be the Messiah. And, you know, says he must undergo great suffering, be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the scribes, and be killed. And after 3 days rise again. What would you hear out of that? Would you hear that rise again? I think our ears would be stopped right at be killed. I will die, you know, and then not only if we did hear that we'll rise again, it's like, you know, Mary's confession with Lazarus. I believe that he will rise again in the resurrection. And Jesus says, I am the resurrection and life, you know, but it's not very many people rose from the dead, you know, other than the ones that Jesus raised from the dead. But, you know, Mark tells us he said this to us very openly, you know, very plainly, very clearly. And Peter, who just confessed him as Messiah, my Lord, takes him aside and says, he begins to rebuke him, saying, we can't let that happen. Let's not go to Jerusalem if that's going to happen. We got to protect you, Lord. You're our Savior. You know, you're our leader. We count on you. And those things are true. Jesus is our leader. We count on him. But if he hadn't suffered and died and been raised from the dead by God's power and by God's love and grace, where would we be? We'd still be offering the sacrifices. We'd still be dependent upon trying to figure out ways to make up for our own sin rather than to be able to trust in God. And Jesus looks at Peter, this Peter who has said, you know, you are the Messiah. And in other Gospels we read that Jesus says, on that rock I will build my church. On that rock of statement, you are the Messiah. But here Jesus says again to Peter, get behind me, Satan. Your eyes are not on divine things, but human things. And it's a reminder to us that God is so much different and so much more than we are. So much more able to forgive and to reach out in love and grace. The last thing in this chapter, very quickly, Jesus says that, you know, if anybody wants to follow me, they must deny themselves. And that denying yourself means giving up a little bit of your self-centeredness. Not anymore saying that, I'm number one, but saying that God is number one, that Jesus is number one, that I can't do it on my own, that I need Jesus. So to deny ourselves means that, it doesn't mean that we say we aren't going to do this or this or this, but it means that we deny that we can on our own come to God as pure and holy. To deny ourselves means to rely upon God. And I think that's what we need to do every day.